Some people think they can rip out a car's engine and still drive just because the steering wheel is still there. That's exactly what they did to Alan. After years of holding the company together with his own hands, without asking for applause or even a pat on the back, he was fired out of the blue, replaced by the spoiled nephew of the owner. They said they were looking for new perspectives, but what they really wanted was easy control and blind obedience. They just forgot one little detail. The system that made everything run was his. The craziest part? Not even the top execs knew it. They were on the verge of selling the company using a technology they had no legal right to keep. And that's where the whole plan blew up. Badly. What was supposed to be a quiet dismissal turned into a full-scale blackout, an internal crisis, and then a plot twist worthy of a movie. This story will show you exactly what happens when they try to erase the one person who's always worked behind the scenes. And maybe, by the end, you'll realize that your greatest strength lies exactly where no one's looking. Alan was the kind of professional everyone wanted on their team. Loyal, technical, quietly brilliant. For years, he was the brain behind the digital backbone of Brookline Technologies. He wasn't just another team member. He was the one holding everything together when things fell apart. When the systems crashed, he was the one pulling all-nighters, often alone, to get things back online. But ironically, the more essential he became, the more invisible he seemed to those at the top. And that's the danger of being too good in a company where last names shine brighter than hard work. The firing came like lightning on a clear day. No warning, no solid explanation. The flimsy excuse? We need new perspectives. But Alan knew that corporate speak all too well. What it really meant was, the boss's nephew is taking your seat. A fresh college grad with zero hands-on experience and a LinkedIn profile full of buzzwords. The kind of guy who walks in wearing polished shoes on a staircase you built step by step. And like any good mentor who's seen this before, Alan knew. When they stop valuing your work, it's not because of poor performance. It's because of political convenience. The cruelest part wasn't even the firing itself. It was how they tried to erase his legacy like he was just another line on the payroll. No formal meeting, no genuine thank you. Just a generic email and a dry good luck, as if years of dedication were just a footnote. So here's a warning. If you feel like your work is constantly being overlooked, don't brush it off. It's like water leaking inside the wall. It starts quietly, but by the time it shows, the damage is already done. Alan caught on fast. That shift in perspective wasn't about vision, it was about control. Because the person who builds the system also knows where its flaws are. And that's terrifying to anyone trying to seize power without knowing how the engine works. Instead of reacting with anger, Alan responded with silence and strategy. Sometimes your greatest power is what you don't reveal right away. And that's a kind of game only those who've been knocked down and stood back up know how to play. The most surprising part? Even after getting fired, Alan's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from former coworkers, folks from the ground level, vendors, and even clients were asking what had happened. Because when the heart of a company stops beating, the whole body feels it. Doesn't matter how many spreadsheets are updated or how many fresh-faced recruits are walking the halls. If the knowledge walks out the door, the glass castle starts to crack. And anyone who understands structure knows what happens after the first crack. And while the world around him seemed to carry on like nothing happened, Alan had already started piecing the puzzle together. He knew betrayals like this don't just come out of nowhere. There are always signs, always a trail. Sometimes all we need is to stop trusting so blindly in the smiles and start reading the data with a different lens. Intuition is a powerful tool, and Alan always trusted his. Months before being let go, he could already sense something was off. Decisions started bypassing him. Files were accessed at odd hours, and key reports vanished without explanation. It felt like someone was tracking his moves, testing the boundaries. And if there's one thing every battle-scarred mentor knows, it's this. When the environment starts shifting subtly, it's because someone's rehearsing a coup. But Alan wasn't the impulsive type. He watched, documented, and waited. Without raising any red flags, he began recording every out-of-line access, system logs, permission changes, digital breadcrumbs that most people would have missed. But for the guy who built the whole architecture, every little deviation was a red flag. He created an internal report, quiet, technical, and thorough. a sort of invisible insurance policy that would later save his own reputation. The lesson here? Never underestimate the value of keeping records. In the digital world, whoever has proof has power. Alan also started cross-referencing canceled meetings with unusual activity on the servers. And sure enough, files that only he should have been able to access were being opened by unfamiliar admin accounts. You know, that kind of coincidence no one admits to but everyone feels in their gut? That was it. The path was clear. They were getting ready to extract his knowledge and cut him loose. And yes, this happens way more often in the corporate world than people like to admit. But instead of blowing it all up right away, he played it even smarter. He began hiding his edge. He stored part of the CoreLink OS code outside the central server and created a time-limited version. The company kept running, but now, with a ticking time bomb embedded inside. Quiet, legal, and completely undetected. That's what we call defensive engineering. And every professional who carries a company on their back should think about it. Not out of paranoia, but for protection. Another key move was how Alan began to emotionally detach from the company, even while still on the inside. He started seeing the workplace not as his home anymore, but as a field for observation. That mindset let him make cool, calculated decisions. A lot of people lose themselves in moments like this because they mix emotion with logic and end up making choices that only benefit the betrayer. Alan, on the other hand, was mapping the board while everyone else thought he was just waiting for the next meeting. So even with the sting of injustice burning inside, he kept a calm face and a subtle smile. Because deep down he already knew, this wasn't about a job anymore, it was about control, memory, and legacy. And who knows the system better than the architect himself? The pieces were already in motion. And so was he. Because soon, the real reason behind the takedown would surface, along with the sacrifices that had shaped his path all along. Alan's story at Brookline didn't begin with applause. It began with pain. He joined the company right after a bitter divorce, his personal life in ruins and his emotional state on the ropes. It was the kind of moment that breaks most people, but he did the opposite. He dove into work like a man grabbing hold of driftwood in the middle of a shipwreck. Every line of code was also a step toward rebuilding himself, and little by little, the man who had lost everything became the backbone of a whole new tech era inside the company. Back then, Brookline was sinking under an outdated system. Constant failures, no real control. Data slipped through the cracks like loose papers in the wind, and no one had a clue where to start fixing it. Alan took the whole mess on, alone at first. While others ran from corrupted spreadsheets and crashing servers, he did what few dared to do. Rolled up his sleeves and went down into the company's digital basement. The result? In less than a year, the air at Brookline changed. Stable network, tighter security, and a rock-solid foundation for growth. But like with every major achievement, the personal cost was high. Alan missed birthdays, important milestones, and even lost a few friendships along the way. His focus was absolute. It's that brutal dilemma so many professionals face. You either move forward, or you live your life. And Alan chose to move forward. So when someone asks, how did he endure so much? The answer is simple. He didn't endure, he executed. Because he had a mission. And sometimes, a mission is all a man needs to keep going even when the ground gives way. The results came, and they hit hard. The company survived the massive blackout in the Northeast thanks to the rock-solid architecture Alan had built. While competitors stayed offline for weeks, Brookline was back up and running in 48 hours. You know that saying, prevention is better than cure? Alan lived by it. He always planned for the worst-case scenario, even when no one believed it could actually happen. That's the difference between someone who leads and someone who just follows orders. The ability to see far ahead. What's most surprising? Even after delivering such high-impact results, he never made a fuss about it. Alan wasn't the type to chase plaques or awards. He cared about making sure the system worked. And here's one of the most valuable lessons I've learned from people like him. When you're really good, you don't need to shout. Your results speak for themselves. But in the corporate world, silence often gets mistaken for weakness. And that misreading is what planted the seed of betrayal. While others thought he was just doing his job, Alan knew he was building a fortress. And not just any fortress. one that could withstand crises, budget cuts, even sabotage. But like any good fortress, it cast shadows. And in those shadows, people were hiding, people with very different plans for Brookline's future. Corporate betrayals rarely happen with noise. They hide in the fine print. Alan started noticing changes that, on the surface, looked like regular reorganization. But for someone with battlefield experience, nothing is ever just routine. Invitations to strategy meetings suddenly disappeared from his calendar. Projects that used to come through him were now being rerouted, quietly, to departments where he no longer had access. The game was on, and the board was being flipped with surgical precision. The final straw? A so-called external consultant arrived. Someone nobody seemed to know who had actually hired. This guy started asking too many questions, digging through technical docs, and auditing systems Alan himself had built. The objective was clear: map everything Alan did, without involving Alan. It was like hiring a guide to explore a forest while ignoring the guy who planted the trees. And anyone who understands the politics of influence knows exactly what that means. They were preparing to erase the system's creator. On top of that, responsibilities were being quietly shuffled. On paper, it looked like decentralization, but in practice, it stripped Alan of control and left him isolated. Part of the tech support team was moved to a different department, and the servers were now being monitored by a new crew. That didn't just reduce Alan's role, it handed over the reins of things he had personally built. It's the oldest trick in the book. First they take your autonomy, then they take your chair. And all of it delivered with a smile and some slick modernization lingo. But Alan wasn't about to play the victim. Instead, he treated every move like a clue in a puzzle only he knew how to solve. He started tracking patterns, cross-referencing emails, logging meeting cancellations. Yeah, it was time-consuming. But if you want to survive in a toxic environment without losing your sanity, you've got to turn frustration into investigation. And that's a life lesson too. When something feels off, don't explode. Observe. The one who watches closely finds out first, and the one who finds out first moves with power. By now he knew he was being taken off the board, but their mistake was assuming he couldn't see it. It's like that old saying, while the fool yells on the battlefield, the strategist is already mapping the next war. And Alan was that strategist. Not because he wanted war, but because he understood that if you don't protect yourself, someone else will use what you've built as a ladder and call you an outdated rung on the way up. He knew that if he wanted a say in what came next, he had to be a step ahead. And so, between empty calendar slots and accidental access requests, Alan connected the dots. Because in the corporate world, when they start shutting you out without a clear reason, it's not incompetence, it's a plan. And in that plan, he discovered something way bigger than just replacing him. Something that linked his most important creation to a behind-the-scenes move that no one dared to speak of. It was through Ryan, an old contact from the cybersecurity world, that Alan got confirmation. Brookline was in talks to be acquired by Silvertech Corp., a major manufacturing giant based in Boston. Apparently, the investors didn't just want flashy reports. They wanted digital stability. And nothing offered that like CoreLink OS. The system Alan had built, with decades of expertise woven into every line of code, had become the company's most valuable asset. But of course, none of this was made public. After all, the plan was to sell the company's beating heart, without even telling the heart. Moves like that aren't anything new in the corporate world. Big companies get sold every year based on invisible assets, an algorithm, a patent, or in this case, a solid, reliable operating system. The strategy was simple. Keep Alan around until the deal was signed, then toss him aside like a bonus feature. It's like selling a turbocharged car and pretending the mechanic doesn't matter. But what they underestimated was this. Sometimes the engine only runs because the mechanic knows how to hear the knock before the breakdown. Silvertech was already conducting unofficial audits. Alan noticed when he saw network traffic coming from IPs linked to their holding company, right in the middle of a CoreLink maintenance session. They were testing the system's stability, measuring its resilience, checking scalability. The problem? They were using the system without giving any credit to its creator. No consultation, no agreement. All under the radar, as if he were just a temporary piece in a chess match he had helped set up. And to a seasoned pro, that's more than just an oversight. It's an insult. And as a mentor, here's a hard truth. If you're the key piece but no one's calling you to the table, you're being used, not valued. Alan had seen this before. Talented people who create, deliver, and then get wiped from the final credits. So he started getting ahead of it. First step, check if CoreLink OS was legally protected. Second, find out just how deep Silvertech's interest really went, because he wasn't about to sit around and wait to be erased. These backroom moves never show up in the company memos, but they're the ones that shape real destinies. The name for it is corporate playbook. And the most common move in that playbook? Claiming ownership of ideas without paying the cost and sweat and sacrifice it took to build them. But Alan wasn't the same naive man who walked into Brookline after his divorce. He was a strategist now, someone who knew that sometimes a counterattack starts with quiet documentation and ends at the legal department's door. And that's exactly what he began to build, a legal and technical counterattack. Because if they wanted to use CoreLink to sell the company, they'd need more than guts. They'd need permission. And that, my friends, would only come on the terms of the man who wrote the source code. Alan wasn't one to argue with words. He preferred action backed by evidence. And that's exactly what he did. He dug through his old files, pulled emails, dates, off-site backups, and found what he needed. Development records of CoreLink OS from before he ever joined Brookline. That changed everything. Legally, he could prove the system didn't belong to the company. It belonged to him. The system had been granted, not sold. And that changes the entire game when it comes to intellectual property. With that advantage in hand, Alan quietly reached out to an attorney specializing in digital law and patents. He officially registered CoreLink OS under his name, including its modular architecture and cloud-distributed logic. He also wrote in an expiration clause tied to his active presence in the operation. In other words, once he left, the system would shut down, and all of it was done transparently, without violating a single contractual clause. The lesson? Technical knowledge is good. Technical knowledge with legal smarts? Unstoppable. He also created an encrypted validation key that, without his personal code, would render critical parts of the system useless. It was as if CoreLink's heartbeat depended on his own. That put Brookline in a tight spot. Either renegotiate with Alan or risk the whole thing coming to a halt. That's when the game flipped. From company target, he became the only one who could save it. The classic pawn reaches the end of the board and turns into a queen. But this wasn't luck. This was preparation. Another crucial move was the off-site backup. Alan knew that once he was out, they'd dig for anything they could use against him. So he did what most forget. Saved clean, documented, legally registered versions of the system outside the company's infrastructure. And yes, it's legal when the software is your own creation, with documentation dated before you were hired. Holding on to that kind of protection is like building a vault inside your own house. You don't use it often, but when you need it, it's there. And while the execs assumed he'd leave quietly, Alan delivered a letter with simple language but airtight technical and legal weight. It listed the authorship records, the usage terms, and the automatic expiration of the license. The pressure was quiet, but it was surgical. Because no war is won by yelling. You win it with positioning and preparation. Their mistake was thinking a tech guy didn't know how to play like a strategist. Risk of losing the system, but because of the growing fear that this whole situation might leak to the market. Because if there's one thing investors hate, it's instability. And what was coming, if not handled fast, had the potential to blow up the entire sale, and that's when the real countdown began. The day came without fanfare, but the impact was brutal. As soon as the customized CoreLink OS license expired, the system shut down. Completely. Entire departments lost access, operations ground to a halt, and the servers went into safe mode. No one knew what was happening. Panic set in. Phones ringing off the hook, urgent messages flying. Emergency meetings being scheduled. That's when it hit them. The system wasn't broken. It was protected. And only Alan could fix it. 2 days passed before he got the first official contact. The company, now desperate, wanted to know the terms for reactivating the system. But Alan wasn't in a rush. He knew that at this point it wasn't just a technical issue, it was a moral and strategic one. And as tempting as it might have been to just restore access for a quick payout, he did something bigger. He laid everything on the table. Not just money, but recognition, legal terms, full credit for the creation, and a bulletproof non-disclosure agreement. The negotiation went exactly how a good negotiation should, with smarts, firmness, and paperwork. Alan presented documents that traced the origins of Core Link step by step. He also made it clear that, while he had played fair until the end, his trust had been broken, and in the real world that comes at a cost. The agreement included retroactive payment for years of platform use, a severance bonus, and a limited-time license, under his supervision. It was a clean, technical, and undeniable checkmate. The most striking part? No one argued the terms. Because when you're staring down the barrel of a digital meltdown, even the arrogant start listening. The company learned the hard way that cutting the strongest link in the chain can bring down the whole system. And many professionals, just like Alan, don't protect themselves out of spite. They protect themselves because they've seen what happens when they don't. The company signed. The system came back. And for the first time, Alan's name was officially documented as the system's creator. This wasn't just a technical win. It was personal, ethical, professional. Because proving you were right, with documents and strategy, hits harder than 1,000 emotional speeches. The reward came, not just financially, but deep in his soul. Because now, Alan knew. No one would ever again dare to call him just a tech guy. And you, reading this right now, need to understand something. The world respects those who know the value of what they build. But for that, you've got to document, protect, and stand your ground. And while the system was back online under his license and supervision, a new offer was already starting to take shape, from none other than the ones behind the whole mess, Silvertech. The difference now? Alan held all the cards. And in a world where so many get tossed aside without warning, that kind of power is the ultimate prize any professional can earn. The offer from Silvertech wasn't just damage control, it was recognition. They knew Alan was more than a guy who could write solid code. He was a solution architect, someone who saw systems as living, breathing organisms. And the offer was crystal clear. Senior consultant, full autonomy, team of his choosing, double salary, and complete freedom to design new projects from scratch. This wasn't just a job, it was a direct invitation to lead the transformation of an entire corporation. And for the first time in years, Alan felt like he could finally start over. The right way. With a new contract in hand, Alan did something many professionals forget. He only took with him what truly added value. He invited loyal colleagues, those who believed in the mission, to join this new chapter. People who had been silenced, ignored, or erased in the old company. Now, they were an elite team, aligned, sharp, and ready to build something different. This wasn't about revenge. It was about purpose, safety, and respect for those who build in silence. On the other side of the story, Brookline began to feel the weight of its own decisions. Ethan, the CEO's nephew, failed to make even basic adjustments to the system. He didn't understand CoreLink's logic and had zero trust from the tech team. In no time, mistakes piled up. And without Alan's support, all that was left were empty reports and a discouraged crew. The result? Ethan was quietly let go, just another name without real weight. And just like that, the cycle closed. Arrogance had met its consequence. Alan, on the other hand, was thriving. Instead of being stuck in the trauma, he used everything he went through as fuel to build smarter. He turned his story into a system, his pain into process, and his lessons into practical tools to prevent future collapses. That's the difference between those who merely survive the system and those who master it. One learns to adapt, the other builds a new model. And Silvertech was now breathing that new model, one built on ethics, clarity, and strength. In the halls of the new company, Alan wasn't just the guy who saved the system. He became a mentor. Young analysts sought him out for advice, not just on tech, but on life. And Alan made sure to repeat a phrase that had become his personal mantra: protect what you build, and never let them make you feel replaceable just because you work in silence. Because in the end, it's not the volume of your voice that defines your worth. It's the consistency of your delivery, and the impact it has on the real world. And so, with a new horizon in front of him, Alan finally felt peace. Not the passive kind, but the kind that comes when you know you no longer have to prove anything to anyone. The game had changed, and he was now playing from the right side of the board. How many times have you felt invisible even while giving everything you've got? Worse, how many times have you failed to protect yourself because you trusted people who only wanted to take advantage of you? Alan's story isn't just about technology. It's about emotional intelligence, silent strategy, and the importance of locking down everything you build, especially when no one's watching. So tell me, if tomorrow someone tried to take what's yours, would you be ready? If this story meant something to you, don't let it pass quietly. Drop a comment below. What was the moment in your life when you felt disposable? And what would you do differently today? And if this content made you reflect, you know what to do. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because around here, we're not just telling stories to entertain. We're dropping truths to make you stronger. And get ready, because the next story might hit even closer to home than you expect.